Imagine this. A millionaire comes home earlier than anyone expected. But instead of finding luxury, laughter, or celebration, he walks into a scene that shakes him to his core. In his own kitchen, he discovers his maid doing something so powerful, so heart-wrenching, that it brings this wealthy man to tears. What could a simple woman possibly do to break the heart of a man who thought he had everything? Stay with me, because this story will change the way you see love, sacrifice, and true wealth. Welcome to BrainFuel, the place where we share powerful stories that touch your heart, open your eyes, and remind you of what really matters in life. If you believe in humanity, compassion, and stories that inspire, then this is your home. Hit that subscribe button, join our growing family, and let's dive into today's unforgettable story together. Nobody in the mansion knew that the millionaire would come home that night. Everyone had assumed he would be gone for at least another 4 days, busy with the business trip he had been preparing for months. His schedule was clear, his flight tickets were booked, and even his personal assistant had updated the house staff with one clear message. The boss will be back on Friday evening. Make sure everything is spotless and perfect by then. But business, like life, has a way of surprising people. The meetings that were expected to drag on for days ended earlier than planned. Contracts were signed quickly, decisions made swiftly, and for once, things went smoother than he imagined. By mid-afternoon on Wednesday, the deal was done, and the millionaire found himself sitting in a hotel room with nothing but silence around him. He stared at the ceiling and thought, why stay here another night when home is only a few hours away? So, without telling anyone, not his driver, not his maid, not even his assistant, he booked himself on the next available flight home. He wanted to surprise them all. The thought made him smile. He hadn't done something spontaneous like this in years. His life had become so predictable. Meetings, contracts, phone calls, late nights at dinners with clients. Everything was planned, polished, and professional. But deep down, he missed the thrill of doing something unexpected. Tonight, he thought, would be different. He would walk into his house without warning, see his staff relaxed, and maybe even catch a glimpse of what life was like in his mansion when the boss wasn't watching. By the time his car rolled into the driveway, the sky was already painted in shades of orange and purple. The grand gates of his estate opened silently, and a long, tree-lined driveway stretched before him like a scene from a movie. Normally, when he came home, the lights of the mansion would already be glowing. His staff would be lined up at the entrance, waiting politely with forced smiles, prepared greetings, and the rehearsed elegance that came with serving a wealthy man. But tonight, the house stood quiet. The millionaire stepped out of the car, suitcase in hand. He noticed the difference immediately. No lights in windows, no footsteps rushing around inside, no perfume of freshly polished floors. The mansion almost looked asleep. For the first time in years, he saw his home as something more than just a display of wealth. It looked like a massive, lonely building. He pulled his key from his pocket and unlocked the front door. It opened with a soft click, and the faint smell of cleaning supplies drifted out. The air inside was still like the calm before a storm. He set his suitcase down in the hallway, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The silence was unusual. Too unusual. Normally, the mansion buzzed with quiet activity. The housekeepers would be dusting. The cook would be preparing something in the kitchen, and soft classical music would be playing faintly in the background. But now, nothing. Just silence. The millionaire paused, listening carefully. And then he heard it. It was faint, almost delicate, a sound drifting through the halls. Not music from a speaker, not the hum of machines. It was a voice. Someone was humming, maybe singing, somewhere deeper inside the house. His curiosity sparked. Who would be singing in his mansion when they thought no one was around? He walked slowly, following the sound, his polished shoes tapping against the marble floor. With every step, the voice grew clearer, warmer. It wasn't a careless tune. It carried emotion, like the person singing was lost in their own little world. The millionaire smirked at first, amused. So this is what happens when I'm not home, he thought. The staff relaxes. They sing. They act human. It was strange. He had lived among them for years, yet never stopped to think of them as people beyond their duties. To him, they were background characters in his busy life, like the furniture that was always there but never noticed. But tonight was different. He didn't feel like a boss sneaking in on employees. He felt like a stranger walking into a story he was never meant to hear. The humming grew softer, then turned into actual words. The lyrics floated down the hallway, trembling with feeling. He couldn't make out every word, but the tone was unmistakable. It was soulful, heavy, yet filled with a strange kind of peace. His chest tightened. He slowed his steps, not wanting the sound to stop. He turned the corner and realized it was coming from the kitchen. The warm, golden glow of the kitchen light spilled across the polished floor, the only light in the entire house. He stopped just outside the doorway, his heart pounding. What he saw next would forever stay with him. The closer he stepped toward the kitchen, the stronger the sound became. What began as a faint hum in the distance now filled the hallway with warmth. It wasn't the kind of singing that belonged on a grand stage. No, this was different. It was raw, gentle, and unpolished, like a lullaby whispered in the dark. The notes wavered, carrying both pain and comfort, sorrow and strength. The millionaire stopped just outside the doorway, careful not to make a sound. He leaned against the wall, listening, his chest rising and falling as the melody wrapped around him. For a man who spent his life in the noise of boardrooms, telephones, and the constant hum of luxury cars, this simple, human sound felt strangely powerful. He peeked inside the kitchen, and there she was, his maid. She wasn't dressed in her usual uniform of pressed white and navy. Instead, she wore a faded sweater and a long skirt, clothes that looked older, more personal. Her hair was tied back loosely, strands falling free as she leaned over the stove. A small lamp in the corner gave the kitchen a warm, homey glow, completely unlike the sharp, polished lighting used when the mansion was prepared for him. For the first time, he saw her not as the maid, but as a woman in her own world, a woman who thought no one was watching. The song spilled from her lips in soft waves. It was an old hymn, he realized, one his grandmother used to sing when he was a child. That memory alone hit him hard. He hadn't thought about those nights in decades, nights when life was simple, when he was just a boy sitting at his grandmother's feet, hearing her voice before bed. The sound stirred something deep within him, something he thought his wealth and success had buried long ago. But it wasn't just the singing that caught his attention. It was what she was doing. On the counter beside her was a small pot of soup, steam rising slowly. A plate of bread rested beside it, carefully sliced, though it wasn't the gourmet bread he was used to. It was simple, rough around the edges. And he realized instantly it wasn't for him. She wasn't preparing a dish for the millionaire's grand dining table. She was cooking something for herself or for someone she loved. His eyes narrowed, curiosity sharpening. Why would she risk this in the mansion kitchen? Staff usually kept their personal lives hidden, separated from the polished world of their employer. But here she was, singing to herself, cooking quietly as though the mansion belonged to her. And then came the moment that shook him. The kitchen door swung open quietly, and a small figure stepped in. It was a boy, no older than 7 or 8. His clothes were worn, the fabric stretched in at the elbows and knees. His shoes looked old and scuffed, far too small for his growing feet. The boy's eyes, wide and curious, lit up when he saw her. "Mom," he whispered softly, almost as if afraid to disturb her singing. The millionaire froze. "Mom?" The word echoed in his head. He had never once imagined that his maid was a mother. She never spoke about her personal life, never asked for special time off, never complained. She showed up each day on time, worked quietly, and disappeared into the evening. To him, she had always been a silent figure who made sure his house was immaculate. But here she was, not just a worker, but a mother, standing in his kitchen, serving her child. The boy ran to her side, wrapping his little arms around her waist. She smiled down at him, her entire face lighting up in a way the millionaire had never seen. She placed the soup and bread in front of him, crouching to his level, her voice tender. "Eat slowly, baby," she whispered, brushing his hair from his forehead. "It's not much, but it'll fill your stomach. Tomorrow, I'll make it better." The boy nodded eagerly and began eating, his small hands clutching the bread as though it was a treasure. The millionaire's throat tightened. He watched as his maid stood over her son, humming again, the same soft hymn, this time with more strength, more love. Every note seemed to wrap around her child like a blanket, shielding him from the harshness of the world. And in that moment, the millionaire realized something painful. He had never really seen her. She had worked in his home for years, keeping everything spotless, ensuring his life ran smoothly, but he had never once stopped to ask about her life, her family, her dreams. She had been invisible in plain sight, blending into the background of his wealth. Yet here she was, carrying burdens he had never imagined, still finding the strength to sing. His chest ached with guilt. He had always thought money solved everything. He believed that paying salaries, maintaining a big house, and living in abundance was enough. But watching his maid now, feeding her child quietly, offering him comfort through song, he realized how shallow his view had been. The boy looked up at her with eyes full of trust, and the millionaire felt his own eyes sting with tears. It wasn't pity he felt. It was respect. Respect for a woman who had so little yet gave everything she had to her child. Respect for her humility, for never asking him for help, for bearing her struggles in silence. And in that quiet kitchen, hidden in the shadows, the millionaire's world shifted. He no longer saw himself as the man in control, the master of the mansion. Instead, he saw himself as a witness, watching true strength, love, and sacrifice unfold before him. He knew, in that moment, that nothing would ever be the same again. The millionaire stood frozen in the shadow of the doorway, his breath caught somewhere between his chest and throat. He felt like a man who had accidentally stumbled into a sacred place. The kitchen, usually just another room in his grand mansion, had transformed into something different, something raw, alive, and heartbreakingly real. The boy's small voice calling the maid Mom replayed in his ears like an echo. Mom? He could hardly believe it. For years she had been in his service, moving quietly from room to room, polishing furniture, scrubbing floors, arranging fresh flowers on the dining table. All without a single complaint. She was diligent, respectful, invisible in a way that some staff learned to be. Yet in all that time, she had never once spoken about her child. Not once. Why hadn't she told him? His mind raced. He thought of all the conversations they had shared, though they were always brief and formal. Yes, sir. No, sir. The laundry is done, sir. Dinner is ready, sir. Always professional, always distant. She had built a wall between her personal life and her job, and he had never tried to look beyond it. To him, she was just the maid, nothing more. But now, as he watched her kneel beside the boy, carefully blowing on the hot soup so he wouldn't burn his tongue, that image shattered. She wasn't just a maid. She was a mother, a protector, a woman who had carried her struggles quietly, never once asking for pity or assistance. The boy devoured the bread hungrily, his small fingers clutching it as though it were a prize. Every bite he took seemed to ease the lines of worry on his mother's face. She stroked his hair gently, her voice soothing. Slow down, baby. Chew properly. I don't want you to choke. Her tone was tender, filled with the kind of love that couldn't be faked. The millionaire felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sharp ache of empathy. He thought about his own childhood. His father, a strict businessman, had never shown him this kind of warmth. Their home had been filled with wealth, but starved of tenderness. He remembered expensive toys lined up in his room, but no one to play with him. He remembered dinners in grand dining halls, but silence filling the air because his parents were always too tired or too distracted to talk. And here was this boy, eating a simple bowl of soup with joy, not because the food was fancy, but because it came with love. That was the difference. Love. Something money couldn't buy. The millionaire shifted slightly, and for a moment he worried he had made a sound. But the mother and son were too engrossed in their little world to notice. The maid was singing again, that same soft hymn, her voice rising and falling like a prayer. She wasn't singing for an audience. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply pouring her heart into the air, creating a shield of comfort around her son. The millionaire's eyes burned. He blinked hard, trying to hold back tears. He didn't want to cry, not here, not now, but the lump in his throat refused to go away. He felt ashamed, too, ashamed that he had walked past her countless times without ever truly seeing her, ashamed that he had assumed she had no life beyond the walls of his mansion, ashamed that in all his wealth, he had never once considered the struggles of the people who kept his world functioning. His gaze fell to Boy again. The child's shoes caught his attention, worn, scuffed, barely holding together. He thought of his own closet upstairs, filled with dozens of leather shoes, polished and neatly lined up, many of them worn only once. The contrast hit him like a blow. Here was a child with barely one pair to his name, eating soup as if it were a feast, while he, the millionaire, had lived in excess without even appreciating it. For the first time in years, he felt small. The boy finished his soup and leaned against his mother, his little body relaxing. She wiped his mouth with the corner of her sleeve and pressed a kiss to his forehead. He smiled, sleepy and content. "I love you, Mama," he whispered. Her lips trembled as she hugged him tightly. "I love you more, baby. Always." The millionaire's chest ached. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight he hadn't felt in his own home for as long as he could remember. His mansion was filled with gold, marble, and chandeliers, but it lacked this warmth, this love, this unbreakable bond between mother and child. He wondered how she had managed all these years. How many nights had she worked in his house, scrubbing floors until her knees ached, only to go home and care for her son with whatever energy she had left? How many times had she gone without so he could eat? How many tears had she hidden while keeping her voice steady and her hands busy at work? The realization hit him harder than any business failure ever had. He had been blind, truly blind. He had thought his wealth gave him vision, control, and power. But in truth, it had blinded him to the struggles and sacrifices of the very people who stood beside him. And as he stood there, silently watching the woman who had worked for him for years, he knew that this secret, this child, this love, this quiet sacrifice, was something that would change him forever. He couldn't turn away now, not after seeing the truth with his own eyes. The millionaire stood in the shadows for as long as he could, but the weight in his chest became unbearable. Each second felt heavier than the last, his heart pounding like a drum inside his ribs. He could no longer just watch. He had to say something. His throat tightened as he stepped forward. The soft creak of the wooden floor broke the silence of the kitchen. The maid's humming stopped abruptly. She turned her head, her eyes widening as if she'd seen a ghost. "Sir!" she gasped, nearly dropping the ladle she was holding. She quickly stood, fumbling to straighten her sweater, her face a mix of shock and embarrassment. I didn't know you were back." The boy looked up too, his spoon frozen halfway to his mouth. His eyes were large, innocent, confused. He didn't know who this tall, sharply dressed man was, but he could sense the tension in the room. The millionaire swallowed hard. His voice cracked slightly when he spoke. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" The maid blinked, clearly stunned. "Tell you?" "About him," he said, his hand gesturing toward the boy. "About your son. About your life." His words stumbled, heavy with guilt and confusion. Her face flushed, and she lowered her gaze to the floor. "Because, sir, it wasn't your burden to carry." That answer pierced him. He stepped further into the kitchen, his polished shoes sounding far too loud in the silence. "Not my burden?" His voice shook. "You've worked for me all these years, keeping this house perfect, making sure everything ran smoothly, while carrying his weight alone. And he paused, the lump in his throat rising again. "I never noticed. Not once." She clasped her hands together tightly, her shoulders hunched. "Sir, you gave me a job. That was already more than I could ask for. I didn't want to seem ungrateful by asking for more." The millionaire's chest ached. He thought of the countless times he had walked past her without so much as a thank you. How many mornings had he rushed out, coffee in hand, too busy to notice the tired circles under her eyes? How many evenings had he returned to a spotless house without wondering who had sacrificed their strength to make it so? And now, here she was, standing in front of him with her head bowed, as though she had done something wrong, when in reality she had done everything right. The boy shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He didn't understand the full meaning of the conversation, but he could sense a heaviness in the air. The millionaire's gaze fell on him again, his thin arms, his patched-up clothes, his shoes that were barely holding together. Something inside the millionaire snapped. He crouched down, bringing himself to the boy's level. The movement startled both mother and son. For the first time, the millionaire's voice softened, trembling as he asked, "What's your name, young man?" The boy hesitated, glancing at his mother. She gave him a reassuring nod. "Go on, baby," she whispered. The boy turned back and spoke shyly. "David, David," the millionaire repeated, the name rolling slowly off his tongue. He smiled faintly, though tears blurred his vision. "That's a strong name." The boy smiled a little, his lips curving upward before he returned to his soup. The millionaire stood again, facing the maid. He searched her face, really looked at her for the first time, not just as an employee, but as a woman who had endured so much silently. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the strength in her posture, and the humility in her trembling hands. "You shouldn't have had to hide this," he said firmly. Her eyes filled with tears. She shook her head. "I couldn't risk it, sir. Jobs aren't easy to find, and I needed this one. I needed to make sure my son had something. If I came to you with my problems, I was afraid." Her voice broke. "I was afraid you'd see me as weak. Replace me?" The words cut him to the core. Replace her? The very thought made him sick. He had been so consumed with money, deals, and appearances that the people closest to him had lived in fear of his judgment. He rubbed his forehead, guilt gnawing at him. "You've given me more than I ever gave you. Do you realize that?" She looked up, startled. "Sir, you taught me something tonight," he said, his voice breaking. "All my life, I thought strength came from power, from wealth, from being untouchable. But watching you with your son, I've never seen anything stronger. You've carried so much alone, sacrificed without complaint, and still found the grace to sing." His eyes brimmed with tears again. "That's real strength. That's real wealth. And I've been blind to it." The maid's lips trembled as tears spilled down her cheeks. She covered her face with her hands, shaking her head as though she couldn't believe what she was hearing. The boy looked up, confused. "Mama, why are you crying?" She knelt beside him quickly, wiping her tears and kissing his forehead. "Happy tears, baby. Just happy tears." The millionaire's heart broke and healed all at once watching them. He had spent his entire life chasing deals, building companies, stacking wealth upon wealth, and yet he had never felt this kind of truth, this kind of purity. In this small, simple kitchen with a bowl of soup and a hymn, he had witnessed something that money could never buy, love in its purest form. He turned his gaze back to the maid. "From this day forward," he said with quiet determination, "things will be different." Her brows furrowed. "Sir, what do you mean?" "You'll never have to choose between feeding him and working here again. You'll never have to worry about whether he has shoes on his feet or food in his stomach. I promise you that." Her tears flowed freely now. She shook her head in disbelief. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," he replied gently. "Just know that you're not invisible anymore. I see you. I see him, and I will never overlook you again." The maid collapsed into a chair, her hands covering her face as she wept silently. Years of quiet struggle, of carrying burdens alone, seemed to release all at once. The boy, still innocent, leaned against her, not fully understanding but sensing that something important had happened. The millionaire stood there, his own tears falling freely, no longer ashamed of them. For once, he didn't feel like the man with all the answers. He felt like a man who had been humbled, transformed by a truth he never expected to find in his own kitchen. And in that moment, he knew his life, his heart, would never be the same again. The kitchen was filled with silence, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty but heavy, thick with emotion, thick with words left unspoken. The millionaire stood there, his heart pounding, his eyes still wet. The maid sat trembling in the chair, her son curled against her side, both of them unsure what would come next. For years, the mansion had been nothing but a shell of wealth. Polished marble floors, sparkling chandeliers, priceless artwork on every wall. Yet it had never felt like home. Tonight, however, with the flicker of the kitchen light, a humble pot of soup and the quiet hum of a child, the millionaire felt something that his millions had never given him. Warmth. He took a deep breath, his voice steady but soft. I've made a lot of decisions in my life. Some have made me rich. Some have made me powerful. But tonight, I'm making a decision that I know will finally make me human. The maid's tear-stained eyes lifted to meet his, uncertain and fragile. He crouched again, this time resting a hand on the back of the boy's chair. David, he said gently, from now on, you'll never go hungry. You'll never wonder if tomorrow will be better. I promise you that. The boy blinked up at him, unsure how to respond. He didn't fully understand promises from men in suits. But something in the millionaire's voice, something tender, unshakable, made him believe. The maid gasped softly, shaking her head. Sir, please? I don't want to take advantage of your kindness. You've already given me a job. That's enough. The millionaire straightened, his expression firm, but kind. No, it's not enough. I gave you a job, yes, but I never gave you respect. I never gave you recognition for the sacrifices you've made. That ends tonight. He paused, his voice cracking. You are not just my maid. You are part of this family. And families take care of each other. Her lips trembled as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. She had spent years convincing herself she didn't need help, that silence was safer than vulnerability. But hearing those words she never imagined would come from the mouth of her employer, broke down walls she had built for survival. Family, she whispered, almost testing the word on her tongue. It felt foreign yet sweet. The millionaire nodded. Yes, family. And I don't just mean tonight. I mean every day moving forward. David will have new clothes, proper shoes, an education worthy of his potential. And you, he looked at her, his voice thick with emotion. You'll never again have to carry this burden alone. The room fell silent again. The weight of his words hung in the air like a sacred vow. The maid covered her mouth with both hands, trying to contain the sobs that threatened to escape. She wasn't used to being seen this way, not as a worker, but as a woman, as a mother, as a human being who mattered. The boy, sensing his mother's tears, hugged her tighter. It's okay, Mama, he whispered. He seems nice. That simple statement nearly undid the millionaire. He turned his face for a moment, wiping his eyes, embarrassed by how deeply the child's innocence cut through his pride. Out of the mouths of children, he murmured to himself. He walked slowly to the dining table in the kitchen, pulling out one of the chairs. Normally, he dined alone at the massive 12-seat table in the grand hall, his meals prepared by chefs and presented like artwork. But tonight, he sat here in the kitchen at the same small table where David had just eaten his soup. May I join you? He asked quietly. The maid looked stunned. Sir, you want to eat here? Yes, he said firmly. I want to eat here with you. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure how to respond. But David's face lit up with excitement. Sit by me, he said, scooting his chair to make space. The millionaire smiled, a real smile, one that wasn't forced for cameras or business deals. He sat beside the boy, resting his elbows lightly on the table. The maid, though still unsure, sat across from them, her hands trembling. It was such a simple scene. 3 people at a small table, 1 bowl of soup, a plate of bread. And yet, for the millionaire, it felt richer than any feast he had ever attended. As they sat together, the maid finally found her voice again. Sir, I don't know how to thank you. You've already done so much tonight. The millionaire shook his head. No thanks are necessary. If anything, I should be thanking you. You reminded me of something I lost a long time ago. The meaning of love, of sacrifice, of family. Money blinded me to those things. But you opened my eyes. Her tears returned, but this time they weren't just from pain. They were from relief, from gratitude, from hope. They ate together quietly, sharing simple food, but it felt like a banquet of grace. The millionaire watched David laugh at little things. Crumbs on his face, his innocence untouched by the struggles his mother had shielded him from. He watched the maid smile through her tears, her face glowing with a mixture of disbelief and joy. And for the first time in years, the millionaire didn't think about tomorrow's meetings or his investments or the empire he had built. He thought only of this moment, this family, this love. When the meal was done, he leaned back, his heart lighter than it had been in decades. "From this night forward," he said softly, "this house will no longer be a place of silence and loneliness. It will be filled with laughter, with singing, with love. That's my promise to both of you." The maid nodded slowly, her hand clutching David's tightly. She still couldn't fully believe what had just happened, but she felt hope rising in her chest, a hope she hadn't dared to feel in years. David yawned, his small body leaning against his mother. The millionaire watched as she held him close, her arms wrapping around him protectively. And in that image, so simple, so human, he saw the truest form of wealth. That night, he didn't retreat to his grand master bedroom. He stayed in the kitchen with them until David fell asleep, carried in his mother's arms. The millionaire followed them to the guest quarters, watching as she tucked her son in gently, whispering another hymn before kissing his forehead. As she turned to leave the room, their eyes met once more. She didn't speak, but her expression said everything: gratitude, relief, and a quiet kind of love. And the millionaire knew, deep in his soul, that this night had changed everything. His empire might have made him rich, but this family, the maid and her son, had finally made him whole.